Hey everybody, welcome to Unit 2. Good job getting your first essay done. I look forward to reading those and getting them graded and back to you. So we are moving on to our second unit, which is the example essay. So today's video, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the writing process, to talk about the example essay, and to talk about your discussion board this week. So I am going to reference the book a little bit, so if you have that available, you can pull that out. But I want to start with the writing process. So in the textbook, in chapter 4, talks quite a bit about different ways you can come up with ideas for brainstorming, looping and clustering and listing, and a number of things that starts on page 51, generating ideas. But I wanted to talk for a minute about myself as a writer and how I generate ideas, which is I look at the assignment, I read and figure out what it is exactly I need to do, kind of plant that in my brain, and then I leave. I take my dogs for a walk, I ride my horse, I go for a hike, I make some lunch, I eat some food. I actually stop actively trying to come up with ideas for it. And to me, that is when I come up with the best ideas possible. So all of these techniques in the book work really well, or can work really well for some people. But for some people, we just need to plant the seed and then spend some time just letting it ruminate back there. And then all of a sudden, when we least expect it, bing, there comes the bright idea for our essay. So it's really important that we plant that seed back here really early, so that way we give ourselves a few days before we actually have to start the drafting process. So as you review essay 2, you can be thinking about what could I do, but you could also just be thinking about, I know I'll come up with something if I don't think about it too hard. And sometimes those are our best ideas. Also in chapter 4, it talks a bit about thesis statements and organization on pages 56 and 57. This is really important as far as once you get the idea, to be able to succinctly state the idea in one sentence. So the thesis is the main idea of your entire essay, and it comes as the last sentence of your intro. So to give you an example, I've just been kind of kicking back, thinking about what would I do as an example essay. And I think I gave you one in the assignment itself, but I thought, could come up with something better than that. So I've been sitting back and I look around and there are my dogs laying around at the floor by my feet. And I think, wow, my dogs have been a real lifesaver. Huh, there it is. There was my idea and my thesis all rolled into one. Okay, my dogs have been a real lifesaver. I can give plenty of examples of when I know that my dogs have both emotionally and mentally and physically saved my life. And so I think that would make for a great essay. And I use that main idea, that one sentence, as my thesis statement. So then for an example essay, we have a general idea, and the example essay builds that with examples of that. So when I go to chapter 8, I get more specific information about how to write an example essay. And they talk about how you start with a general idea and then you give a number of concrete and explicit examples that exemplify or illustrate that idea. So if I'm going with the example of my dogs are real lifesavers, then I would think about different ways to show examples of that. Now on page 240, they say some methods, the book offers some methods on how to give examples. One of them is a description. So I could actually describe my dogs as part of this essay. Another one is narrate. I could give a very short story about a time when one of my dogs saved my life. The third one is cause and effect. Okay, I could give the cause of my dog's presence and the effect that they have on me when I'm going through tough times. So I could use all three of those strategies to build my example essay. I do want to point out something in the book that I do not recommend doing. I disagree with the book a little bit here, and it's on page 240. And it says that when you transition between examples, that you can use phrases like for example or for instance. And yes, you can. Those aren't particularly wrong, but they're not necessarily the advanced writing, the nuanced writing that we're looking for at this level. So while you may use those, I would push you to use different techniques and not be so explicit as for example or for instance. The book also talks about using a rhetorical question. And I advise against that as well, because if we pose a rhetorical question and our reader doesn't agree with us or have the same answer that we do, then that rhetorical question can fall on the ground, fall flat. So I would think about how can you transition between examples and offer examples without having to say, and here's an example. How can you do that without actually announcing it? Let the ideas flow organically and naturally from one to the next. And if you're having trouble doing that, sometimes it's actually just the way that you've organized your ideas. Oftentimes I'll work with students where I'm like, oh, do you see how well connected these two ideas are? But you split them up into two very different places. And so if they actually just moved a lower idea right after another idea, they found that it flowed much better without having to use these kind of really explicit and stifled transitional devices. So something to think about. The last point I want to touch on today is discussion board 2, where I'm asking you again to choose some powerful passages from the essays that you're going to read in the textbook. Again, this goes to the idea that the better readers we are, the better writers we become. So one of the best ways to improve our writing is to start to look at, identify, and analyze how other writers write well. And so that's what I'm asking you to do in this discussion board is we're reading examples of example essays and think about, boy, how did they do that? How did they transition? How did they write a thesis statement? What kinds of examples did they use? What strategies did they use? So as we think about that, we can start to incorporate those strategies in our own writing. So it's a really powerful opportunity in our discussion board to actually look at writing as both a reader and a writer. So if you have any questions this week, I'm here to help. Let me know. And happy reading, discussing, and thinking.